regulations, in terms of enabling the environment for the private sector to invest in infrastructures. In terms of capacity building, there are other roles, maybe at regional level, at international level, and these roles and responsibilities are still a subject of debate until today. Some governments have sort of evolved in terms of the positions they adopt. Some governments have not. They are still, you know, at the same point where they were in 2005 in Tunis. So I just wanted to give this a very quick introduction and to sort of, you know, shed some light on the roles of governments, but then I want to also allow my other panelists to each one to reflect on their experiences. And let's start with David Olive. David used to be with the private sector for a long time, and I'm sure he can talk to this experience in more detail. David.
Thank you very much, Baher. And the lesson, the history lesson we received from Dr. Mueller was, I think, a very helpful background to a time when some companies, especially in the information technology side, were trying to form a new model, a new approach, a less regulated approach from, let's say, the telecommunications industry as it was known in that time. And so there was this these new trends of new businesses coming into being, and the notion of that should be less regulated or self-regulated on the one hand versus the government approach of top-down regulation on the other, and the struggle to deal with new technologies which were, for many of them, somewhat disruptive. I was working at the time for a Japanese multinational called Fujitsu Limited. It is a big IT and telecommunications supplier in Japan. And at that time, it was just beginning, as Dr. Mueller mentioned, in 1995, the commercialization or commercial use of the internet was beginning. And the businesses that we were with, both in the United States at the time and elsewhere outside the country, were trying to promote this new model. The issue, of course, was that the businesses were organized by their particular specialties. So there was the software industry, or there was the hardware industry that I just broke. There was the semiconductor industry, and there was the telecommunication industry, and they were in these silos that were very vertical and not horizontal, where the internet and these new technologies were across the board for opportunities. And so these companies were worried that there wasn't an association, or there wasn't a group of people nationally or internationally who could explain this new technology both to other businesses of where it could be possibly used, or more importantly to governments who were not sure what it was or how they should deal with these new industries, should they be regulated or not, and the like. So in 1995, I had the company join something called the Global Internet Project. This was run, organized initially by Netscape and other interested parties such as IBM, 9X, which was a deregulated telephone company on the East Coast of the United States, soon became Verizon as we know it today, Deutsche Telekom, British Telecom, Fujitsu, and some other companies, Deutsche Bank and some of the banks, to look at how they could better promote these new technologies for use in their particular sectors, but again under a deregulated or self-regulated approach. And so we encouraged these executives to get together, and we then had joint meetings with various groups: the OECD, the World Intellectual Property Organization, the ITU, the World Trade Organization, as well as attending meetings such as the Internet Governance Forum. I attended the first one in Athens, as well as the WSIS as well, to promote and explain these new technologies. Of course, at that point, the big application that was important was e-commerce. And because of some of the statements of some enthusiasts, e-commerce was told to be something totally different from regular commerce. And all of a sudden, the OECD governments got very upset and worried that You mean taxation and jurisdiction? Nothing applies. This is in cyberspace, whatever that was. It's rule, no law, no governance. We have to worry about that. And so the OECD organized a group, and this series of executives went to tell them what it was. No, of course, we go use the banking system, and yes, of course, we are regulated by state laws and the laws that govern commerce and industry. But this is kind of a new form of that, and this helped calm those governments, at least in the OECD, down, that it was not evading taxes or not using the current business practices or business laws. So that was an important element of trying to explain this. But of course, this generated other industry groups as more and more companies wanted to be part of this ICT revolution, including an internet revolution. And so I was also involved in something called the World IT Services Association, called WITSA. And this was 50 national IT associations around the world that were trying to promote the use of ICT, but also the internet and the prospects for that, the benefits for that. And they were also involved with going to internet governance forums. They were at the WISAs obviously as well, as a more organized way to express the business's point of view. Because of the IGFs and because of the WISAs forums, the businesses were also able to, again, another new approach, to deal with the intellectual property group interests, the civil society interests, these other consumer interests that the businesses only focused really maybe in their selling of products as opposed to a more general coalition to promote technologies and promote the internet. And so to that extent, that was what was their role. The other interesting story in 1998, when they were forming ICANN, there was an issue of funding, and this Global Internet Project contributed some money to help the operations of ICANN in that year. So it was trying to kind of help this new approach, which was private sector led, business associated friendly, and less regulation for the use of the internet to promote this as a new technology to get it off the ground and get it working. And so those were my interests. Of course, fast forwarding to 2010, when I met the president of ICANN in Washington, D.C., and then he suggested that maybe I might be interested in joining ICANN. And so my work from the private sector supporting the internet went from there to working at ICANN to support the internet. So that's the story.
Thank you, David, for reminding us of, the involvement of the business and the private sector in the early days of the internet and internet governance. I want to remind everyone that we want this session again to be an interactive session, so feel free to raise your hand and ask any question at any time. Now I'm going to turn it over to Adam. Adam is going to talk to us about the role of civil society. We heard from Milton this morning that WISIS told us that civil society has a very important role. We're not sure what exactly this role is, so Adam is going to tell us more about this role.
Thanks. What I wanted to do was try and, because civil society is quite nebulous, it's quite hard to define, so I thought we'd try and define it by how we think of civil society within ICANN, which is a slightly different approach from what we just heard from Bahir and David, but it's sort of where do we fit in that multi-stakeholder model, and thinking about multi-stakeholder or stakeholder representation, it's about affected perspectives being represented in a policy process. So civil society organizations, whatever they are at the moment, obviously have affected perspectives. So how do we ensure that we can achieve that representation of those points of view, those perspectives? Up here, I hope you can see it, is a view of what civil society in ICANN looks like. Civil society organizations would be not-for-profit organizations, non-commercial organizations, including researchers and academics. And also we have end users, internet end users, so individuals. And we've tried to create structures that represent the perspectives that those people hold and have and want to bring into the policy processes. If you click on the next one, we should go to, oh, I do, oh, no, it's, oh, it's at the end there. Thank you. Where do I point this creature? is apparently a technology-driven organization. Right. So try the arrow. Does the arrow? Does the arrow work? The arrow works. Okay, so it's quite a complicated bunch of organizations. ICANN has a lot of people involved, and this slide tries to represent that. You see there's a bunch of academics there, and those would be people, of course, professors and students, researchers, internet end users, which could be anybody and everybody, and there are mechanisms to represent those. Civil society generally, which typical non-commercial organizations, not-for-profit organizations, whether they're advocacy groups or just not-for-profits that are representing different interests, and then technical community. We often draw out the technical community into a separate stakeholder groups, but there are certainly technologists who also sort of gravitate over to the civil society organizations. If you click the next one, that I hope you can see, but the idea is that it's the model that we see within ICANN itself, and over to the right hand side you've got the generic name supporting organization, which is where policy is developed for generic top level domain names, as we've been discussing this morning. And then over on the left hand side is the at-large community, and they're the representatives of individual end users. Originally, as Milton was saying, that's where we had an election came through, and they were represented by a membership. But today they're in a more structured group that is not a set of individual members, but organized groups. Can you click the next little bit? Oh, is it working now? Hey, good. And this is civil society as it's organized. So we have the at-large community, which, as we said, we're individuals. They're representing the interests of individual users in policy development, and they act through what is an at-large advisory committee, which we abbreviate to ALAC, and they provide advice on any and all activities, really policy activities that ICANN gets involved with. As an advisory committee, they can provide a very broad range of advice, so global internet users can comment and provide a perspective on just about everything that ICANN does. In the generic names area, there's a group called the non-commercial stakeholders group, and these are divided up into two constituency groups, one of which looks at a lot of the issues Milton again mentioned this morning of promoting non-commercial interests, of freedom of expression, privacy, human rights, and so on. And there's a second constituency which is about operational concerns, which is more about how do you manage your domain name. If you're a non-for-profit, how do you make sure that it works? What are the security considerations, and so on. So there's two groups that anybody who's non-commercially minded may be able to join there, and individuals are able to join the at-large. The at-large is organized into membership-based organizations, which are called at-large structures. There are about 200, 220 of these, and if you have a membership-based organization, such as an internet chapter, of which many are members, you participate through them as an individual member of these sort of organizing groups. A lot of them also take unaffiliated people, so as an individual you can also join. And that's essentially how individuals participate in ICANN, and they're providing advice to the ICANN board, but also to all the other structures as policy develops. They're organized regionally, so what you see is the member structures at the local level. They're regionally aggregated into the 5 ICANN regions, and then they elect a committee which represents them in the sort of formal processes. So it's a bottom-up process of bringing in ideas and then representation up to the ICANN board level and other processes. And they provide advice on any public comment, any subject. They can also comment on external processes, and they get involved with all kinds of different working groups that ICANN structures. We haven't spoken about ICANN in detail, so I won't try and go into detail here because it will be confusing, but basically what you're seeing is that as an individual user, you have opportunities to participate in a very broad range of ICANN policy development, in fact, just about everything. Non-commercial stakeholders group is generally more specific. in that it addresses primarily generic name issues, so top-level domain names that ICANN develops the policy for and brings in the non-commercial voice to that. And as I mentioned, it does so through these two constituency groups, the non-commercial users group, which Milton helped found in 1999, and a new one called the non-commercial operational concerns, NPOC, and that was formed in about 2012. And as I said, they're more interested in the operational issues, but they also get involved in policy, of course. And NCUC, the non-commercial users, has over 500 members now, and they're represented in over 100 countries, so it's quite significant. It's a good global voice that we're trying to bring in, and that's the kind of work they do. And Milton, you might want to elaborate on what the type of issues that the NCUC does in a moment, just to give people an idea. And then the NPOC, non-profit operational concerns, is newer and smaller and only takes organizations as membership, but it has now it's about 80 members, and again, reasonably good geographic representation. So we're seeing a lot of non-commercial voices in ICANN, and it works on issues about domain name registration, defending domain names, fraud, cybercrime, and so on. And yeah, so that's a list of issues that typically you might see the non-commercial users talking about. I don't know if you want to say where there have been successes and failures and interest in that, and then we can probably close, Malcolm. If there's anything to.
Right, so the non-commercial stakeholders have been focusing mainly on, trademark domain name conflicts are a big part of ICANN. It's one of the reasons it was founded. And so one of the reasons NCUC was started was to provide a alternative perspective to the trademark owners that when sometimes they overreached, like that Pokey case I told you about, or some of the other concurrent use cases. So we were formed, since trademark dominated so much ICANN policy in the early days, we tried to bring more of a freedom of expression voice into these policies related to that. Many times we were not successful because the representational scheme in ICANN was actually balanced, or I should say imbalanced, in favor of the trademark and business interests, and non-commercials were a small minority. And then in 2007, I think it was, somewhere around there, the GNSO was rebalanced in a more fair way. So since then, we've had more success in shaping policies. In terms of the multilingual internet, I wouldn't say we've taken a lead on that. I would say that the standards process has really been the driving factor there, and the question is, there's a very interesting question about the level of adoption of multilingual domain names. I think that's for someone else to talk about, but we certainly supported creating multilingual domain names, but the implementation has to come from registries and registrars, and that's not really what we do. With human rights, we have really taken a lead in pushing a human rights agenda within ICANN, insofar as it's consistent with the mission related to domain names. And one of the biggest controversies now is about privacy and the WHOIS. So there's WHOIS is sort of like a gigantic distributed database with personally identifiable information about domain name registrants, some of whom may be individuals as opposed to corporations. So there is a privacy and data protection issue there, and there are many business interests and law enforcement interests who love the fact that they don't have to go through any due process to get that information. They can just look it up, and there are businesses that are formed around automatically collecting all that data and selling it to people to do various kinds of security functions. So there's a real division within the community about how to handle this latent conflict between open access to this information and various forms of data protection law or regulation in different parts of the world. And with the rise of the European Union or European Commission is going to institute a much stricter form of data protection that would have extraterritorial effects on the rest of the world, and so ICANN is having to reassess many aspects of its WHOIS policies in anticipation of that law. And of course, in accountability and transparency, NCUC has been kind of, well, when we talk about bottom-up policy-making processes, we have frequently been at the bottom. And sometimes it was easy with an unaccountable process to ignore our voices because we were perceived as less powerful or less important than the businesses or the governments. So we had a very special interest in the accountability reforms that took place in the last 2 years, and were leaders in various aspects of that. Maybe we can go into the details during a discussion period, but when you have the so-called bottom-up and multi-stakeholder consensus-based policy-making process, it's very important that you have various kinds of safeguards to see that the proper policies are followed. So we believed in strengthening the appeals process. We believed in making ICANN more accountable to its participants or members, and we succeeded in a lot of these goals during the transition process, fell short in a few others. And the auction proceeds, that's always interesting to people. Where does the money go? So ICANN, I wouldn't say they made a lot of money, but they generated a lot of money through the results of these auctions. When you have contention for a particular TLD, who gets it? And ICANN wisely, I think, settled on an auction process for adjudicating these disputes. But then the question of where does the money go from the winning bid is really kind of an open issue. And this has major implications for ICANN. I think all of us on this panel can address this, but we don't want ICANN to become detached from its mission. You know, let's say it's got a big pot of money and it starts, what does it do with this money? Does it buy political support? Does it interfere in the industry in certain ways? Does it just reduce the fees it levies on registrars because it can use this money to cover its expenses? Or does it start doing good works or development support around the world? This is a big, interesting debate that's going to have to take place within ICANN, and there's already a working group or cross-community working group on this issue. So how's that?
Thank you. Okay, so we still have about 20 minutes, so plenty of time to get questions and comments from you. I can see Salam, and then there is another one. Okay, can we get the mic?
Quick question. Which CCWG is in charge of this issue? Milton, did you say? Of where the money is going to go, and the last slide.
Yes. The issue there is being handled by a cross-community working group. That means of ICANN. That means people from the various stakeholder groups are participating in looking at the framework for the handling of such monies. No, different one, yes. It's the cross-community working group on auction proceeds.
I have a question about WHOIS. So now I understand what the businesses have to take from it and why it's beneficial for them. But originally for ICANN, how did this come to life, and what's the what's the purpose of it for ICANN to have it detailed in such a way and open? The who is. Who is, yes.
Any way to deal with that hum? I think it's affecting all of our microphones. So the original purpose of the whois was as kind of a internal directory for the small group of scientists and researchers who were developing the internet. So it was not a big deal. It was sort of like, oh, somebody at MIT is working on this node. Something's gone wrong with that node. I want to find out how to get in touch with them. I can use that whois information. And then as we described this morning, the internet was sort of suddenly commercialized in a way in which we kind of made the policies up as we went along. And during that process, we were having all these domain name trademark conflicts. So the whois became sort of the trademark owner's identity card for the internet. And when we were creating the new contracts for the ICANN regime, the trademark interests insisted on making public open whois a contractual requirement of all registrars. And then the privacy interests asserted themselves, and many end users started, the registrars started selling, well, if you pay us another $5 for your domain name, we'll have a kind of a privacy shield process in which we will conceal your registration information. So then we had a policy process about that. But the issue of the purpose of whois is actually fundamental, because under many forms of privacy law, the data you collect, that you can legitimately collect, is related to the purpose of the use of the information. So in the mid-2000s, we had the big debate about the purpose of whois, and we pretty much agreed that it was fundamentally about technical coordination. However, this debate is still going on. Some people want to say the purpose is essentially to anything that people currently use it for is a legitimate purpose. Other people say there should be a more limited definition of the purpose, but they might disagree about what that is. I think one thing we can all agree about is that one of the key purposes of whois is contactability of the registrant. So somehow you should be able to contact the registrant, and that the whois information should make that possible. How far you go beyond that, how you enforce it, that's all a very controversial and long-standing policy process within ICANN.
More questions? We're not going to give you 15 minutes back, so we need to...
Actually, I have a question about how civil society kicked off in ICANN, and how it became a lot of groups that have more efficient role since Mr. Miller talk about the civil society, and at first the civil society role which were like not efficient.
The original structures, I mean, when ICANN was created, there were two major aspects to that. One, I suppose, is that one of the purposes
world, of course, the businesses were used to presenting their point of view to the government, which was really based on selling their products. But in the internet world, they had to realize that, that's an important role. They have to sell their products, satisfy their consumers. But at the same time, when they have to look at these new technologies, who can be their allies? And this is where to make sure that the technology can be used properly. So this is where other groups have come into play. And civil society, also major users, academic groups, whatnot, writing research about the pros and the cons, the benefits or the problems of technologies. These are also very helpful documents and interests to hear. And so they then started to evolve to make sure that there would be a structured response, the business constituency or the IP constituency, and a more generalized response, such as at large for the individual users or the non-commercial users. And so you had a balancing of both organized networks, and that was kind of like the internet is a network of networks, so were the interest groups the networks of networks. They linked to business associations around the world, or constituencies and groups around the world, or the individual user through the at-large and other groups, to have that individual perspective as I use the internet, I'd like my people to.
Also maybe with the rise of new policy issues and topics, we've seen more interest and more engagement coming from civil society groups and other groups. For example, at ICANN, the new GTLD program that was launched several years ago, and with the introduction of 1,000 plus new top-level domains, all kind of domains, generic, geographical, cultural, and so forth. The process itself and the kind of domains have attracted more civil society groups, more academic groups to become more active at ICANN. Likewise, the work on the transition and the accountability mechanisms also attracted many civil society and rights groups to engage actively in ICANN work. So it's also the kind of work that may attract more audience and more crowd to become more engaged.
So sometime during the introduction, somebody said they were a political science student. Who was that? Okay, so, and there was another one. Yeah, it was you, right? Yeah. So in the early days of ICANN, the multi-stakeholder approach was a little bit naive. You had fundamentally an environment dominated by computer scientists making decisions about the structure of political representation. So if you look at the early GNSO, or it was called the DNSO back then, the Domain Name Supporting Organization, you had several constituencies. Like you had the business constituency, and you had the trademark constituency. Now wait a minute, all trademark owners are probably businesses, right? And then you had the Internet Service Providers constituency, which were also trademark holders and businesses. But, you know, they're connectivity providers, so they're important, so they need to be represented. But fundamentally, in the early DNSO, you had 3 private sector constituencies, and you had the registrars, and you had the registries, which are businesses, and you had the CCTLDs. They were a constituency, not a supporting organization. These are registries. They're registries, right? And then you had the non-commercials. So it was like 9 to 1 in terms of the balance of the representation. And then they wised up a little bit. They did a consulting report from the London School of Economics that told them this was horribly unbalanced. And so they created a much better structure, which was, okay, we've got contracted parties. These are the registries and registrars who sign contracts with ICANN. They are the people who are directly governed by what ICANN does. And so they have a special status in the sense that we in civil society may want to impose all kinds of burdens upon them because it doesn't cost us anything, right? It costs them. So what they did was they split the GNSO into 2 houses. There's the contracted parties house and the user house. And in the user house, the commercials and non-commercials had the same number of votes. And on the contracted party house, the registries and registrars had the same number of votes.
example, the Chinese characters or Arabic. We don't have the problem that it looks like a Latin letter. But in other languages, such as Cyrillic or Greek, they do use things that look like a Latin letter that could be confusing in trying to make sure the unique identifier. And so the CCNSO set up a series of tests to do that, and the Security, Stability, and Reliability Advisory Group warned that was that test strong enough? And so they said maybe that's not a good policy. You should add some sort of extra safeguard to that. And so there was a case where there was disagreement between the technical experts on the one hand and the policy CCTLD makers on the other. And both sides recognize that we have to figure out a good way to balance off the testing so that there's not a problem of confusing the label or the domain name with a different language. Because the whole purpose is to make sure it's unique enough to get to someone in Cyrillic, Russian, and not sent to someone, let's say, in the United States by mistake. And so that's a discussion. So they stopped their processes, and they're now looking at how they can best make a compromise so it could work in a technically competent way and a policy way.
Any more questions? Or comments, yeah. If not, I do have one final question I want to put to the table. Again, our session is about roles and responsibilities of stakeholders, and the question I have is how are the roles and responsibilities of the different stakeholders are evolving over time? You know, many examples recently with, for example, governments in my region in the Middle East are very, nervous about internet and, what is happening on the internet being used by terrorist groups and all this. And they use this as a reason to have more control and to find more means to control the internet. We've heard a few months back from one of the Microsoft executives calling for something called like Geneva Convention for the internet and so forth. So it seems that with the continuous evolution of the internet, that some believe that the roles and responsibilities of the stakeholders must evolve as well. So I'm just putting this question to the table if anyone wants to it's more about the future. How do we see the future?
Well, I think, as you suggested, the biggest change is in the role of the governments, because they tried to reassert kind of a traditional intergovernmental treaty kind of a role, and that role has been evolving in various ways. And the status of the gap with respect to other stakeholders has been evolving within ICANN. Now, again, I would say don't confuse ICANN with all of Internet governance. ICANN is dealing with a very small slice of it, namely the
on conflict. I remember there was a problem with GAC giving advice without being asked, or like, could you go into that? Was it that GAC just went in? Does GAC give advice only when asked, or can they just step in and say, this is what we think and this is what ICANN can do or must do?
The Government Advisory Committee issues a communique after every ICANN meeting when they meet. That's 3 times a year, commenting on various things, and they give advice when they wish. The advice, of course, must be consensus advice, consensus of the members of the GAC to do that, and then the board has to reflect on that. They discuss that with them, and they try to balance off the interests with what they're saying. If the board does not agree with the GAC, it must explain to them why it cannot accept their advice for number and be specific on the reasons why we cannot do that. Or if it accepts the advice, it says, yes, this is within keeping of what you want or what you are suggesting that we have greater clarity, greater responsibility, or the policy already deals with that. And so that happens at every time the GAC issues advice, which, as I say, is after every ICANN meeting.
Okay, Salam.
That is called our public forum, and the public forum occurs at 2 of the 3 international ICANN meetings. That is to say, our community meeting or our annual general meeting. And those meetings are usually 2 sessions, one at the beginning of the session on a Monday, and then another one on a Thursday. And basically that is an opportunity for members of the community to ask any questions of the board. More recently, the CEO, Joran Marby, has instituted a similar approach for his executive team. I'm on that team, to sit in a session to be open for whatever questions they have. And so we have those sessions. Why we don't have it in the middle meeting, the policy meeting, it's a shortened meeting, and we have a different kind of format through cross-community discussions that allow us to have the equivalent of an open forum. But it's not with the board. The board is there. They're not up there answering questions directly. It's the community discussing things, and they interact with board members in the audience. Yes, they could, of course. They could bring anything.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we need to end this session, so I'd like to thank our speakers, and we still have questions.
Simple question, but I want to know the exact role of ICANN board members. How many are them, and also is there any diversity of gender diversity there or not?
Tomorrow we're going to spend 90 minutes on ICANN structure, including the board, the policy development process. So tomorrow we're going to have a full session on this.
Okay, thank you.
All right? Okay. So we're going to move to the next session on national and regional IGFs. Okay. Thank you.
that the governments of the world tend to think they ought to address, and you will find summits, global summits on things like women's rights, environment, climate change, and so on. And towards the end of the 1990s, governments decided they ought to take a look at information society, because they'd realized that this internet thing had come along and they weren't too sure what it was. But they knew they ought to be involved, and they knew that there were some challenges there, that some global solutions they felt should be addressed. And it was solutions that they would come to. It's within the United Nations system, so one member, one state, and sovereign sort of addressing of issues. Excuse me while I try and find. So the summit was in 2 stages, as we've mentioned earlier. Geneva, which ended in 2003, and as Milton mentioned, there was a long preparatory process of developing statements for that. And then after 2003, the statement that came out of that intergovernmental meeting in Geneva in 2003 was then developed further to a meeting in Tunis in 2005. So it was a very long process, very involved process, and it really gave us 2 things. The Geneva Declaration 2003, it really established the term of internet governance in the international arena. Until then, people who had been involved with ICANN and a few little things might use that term, but this sort of popularized it so that people became aware that this was something to start paying attention to, and it also gave us the notion of multi-stakeholder governance. I mentioned that in around 2001, when there was the first preparatory meeting, civil society and most of business sat outside of the room, and we sat there literally for 2 weeks just waiting to be allowed in. That was our main topic. We were basically saying that we have expertise and you in the room do not, which is quite an arrogant thing to say, but it was true, and also governments didn't like to hear it. But in the end, it evolved, and what we ended up with partly was this working group on internet governance. We have people who were members of that in the room, and what they did was worked on a definition of how we should consider internet governance, and we took that forward. I put it in small text. Milton has already read it out, but it's the development and application, and in square brackets there's the roles and responsibilities of the various stakeholders, of the shared principles, norms, rules, decision-making procedures, and programs that shape the evolution and use of the internet. And this is about evolution and use, so it's an extremely broad definition. It's not just referring to ICANN or operational concerns. It's a broad definition of how we use the internet, the content we put on it. It's an interesting and broad definition there. That was June 2005. So the next phase was very much influenced by the methodology that this working group on internet governance told us about. This was a multi-stakeholder group made up of governments, of civil society and private sector in quite equalish numbers. There were obviously more governments, but that's always the case. But it was a multi-stakeholder group, and that carried on into the discussions for the Geneva phase of this, for the Tunis phase of this particular discussion. Governments pretty much endorsed the WIGIC report, which meant they endorsed this approach to multi-stakeholder governance. They recognized that the existing arrangements were appropriate, which meant that basically they were acknowledging that all of those technical processes, including ICANN and the regional internet registries, were appropriate and were working effectively. And this is really the point of these slides I'm trying to get to, is that they recognized that we needed to convene a forum for multi-stakeholder policy dialogue, and that is the IGF. So this is one of the major outcomes of the Tunis agreement, that we needed a place where multi-stakeholder dialogue could occur. And one of the purposes for that was it's a sort of pre-negotiation forum. You may go in with points of view, but you're not going in with statements that you're trying to negotiate with another party. It's somewhere that you will go to discuss and, as the word says, have a dialogue. And that was the purpose of that. First Internet Governance Forum was 2006 in Athens. I think the first national and regional IGFs took that place in 2008, but there might have been in 2007, I can't remember, and we need someone to do some research on that. The records are always very bad, but anyway, I'm sure there probably was one in 2007, and in the Caribbean they will tell you that they had an internet forum going back to about 2004 because they foresaw all of this. But anyway, so internet, the national and regional sort of IGFs really kicked off in about 2008, and the main reason was to start to try and identify issues at the national level and also start to build multi-stakeholder processes at the national level. People were thinking, okay, I quite like this way of working, private sector, civil society. How can I influence my government more effectively at the national level as we think about internet policies? So one of the purposes of the national and then the regional IGFs were to actually try and bring that knowledge from the national level into the national policy processes. And also to take it up, either from national to regional or regional to the global IGF, so that instead of the global IGF sort of flowing downwards, which is not the typical way for our bottom-up policy development, it was a way of, you know, introducing a flow from local to national and so on. So that's how we sort of saw these things evolve. Right, so 2006, 2008, I think the first. There are now 41 national and regional IGFs. There might be more because Zambia and Namibia seem to be starting one very soon each, so that would be 43, so no one's really counting. Some of them happen, some don't some years, so let's say 41. And something that's quite important is that they can make up their own rules. You may be aware that some of the criticisms of the global IGF are that it doesn't have an outcome document. You know, it's been going on for many years now and there's no real outcomes. What are the concrete outcomes that we get from this process? Are there recommendations? Is there a declaration? Is there a formal way that work from the global IGF passes on into another policy process? Well, at the moment, not really. But if you run a national IGF or a regional IGF, you create your own rules, essentially. So people are finding that quite useful. There have been African declarations on internet governance that have been then been used to influence regional processes and go into the formal intergovernmental processes. So you don't have to limit yourself to what the global IGF does. You can, or people can, be more sort of inventive on that or meet their local needs. Here are some examples of the topics that are being discussed, and these are proposals for regional and national IGFs this year. So trying to bring a few together because they give different titles to them, of course. Women in tech and gender issues, women and girls in particular in developing economies were discussed in so Afghanistan, Costa Rican IGF, Nigeria IGF, cybercrime including calling out Bitcoin in a couple and blockchain, Armenia, Nigeria, China, Costa Rica, Nigeria twice because I'm obviously failing to type, Nepal and the Dutch Youth IGF, online safety, Nigeria, Netherlands IGF, access to digital divide, and this would include youth, women and kids, persons with disabilities, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Costa Rica, Nigeria, Malawi, Central African IGF, probably more, but these are the ones that have been pulled out into a table that's been generated. Human rights, Costa Rica, Nigeria, Spain, internet privacy, and the right to be forgotten has been called out, Costa Rica, and so on. You can read them. Fake news and ethics online and the role of intermediaries, excuse me, Costa Rica, Netherlands, etc. Internet Protocol version 6, it seems to be a standard in many of the different regional and national IGFs. How do we transition from one type of IP, Internet Protocol, to another? And Internet Protocol version 6, IPv6, is the next version that our network operators want us to transition to, and that's been a major topic in Japan, Kenya, and South Korea. Sometimes these topics reflect who the organizer is. If the main organizer is a technical organization, you're liable to see more technical topics. If it's a civil society, etc. And so they can reflect different points of view. And then strengthening the national and regional IGFs themselves, and particularly multilingualism, Panama, Spain, Ecuador, Black IGF, and so on. So you can see a range of issues. I'm interested to know which are the ones you might be interested in, and which would you talk about, which are the ones that you would prioritize. Is it women and tech and gender? Is that an issue for you? Cybercrime is important everywhere, it seems. Online safety, including children online. Access to digital divide. And here there has to be a sort of caution that we're talking about internet governance, not in ICT for dev. So it's not about technology for development. It's about the policies that allow those technologies to deploy and evolve. Slight difference, but you're not really talking about building networks per se or something like that. Human rights, what type of human rights? ICANN is bringing human rights considerations into its bylaws. Privacy is important, balancing the interests and allowing a collaboration or a coexistence of the needs of security and privacy. Fake news, which of course has been an important issue, and we hear a lot of that from the United States at the moment, one way or another. But ethics, and then the role of intermediaries. IPv6, as I mentioned, and then how to strengthen these processes, make them more useful, particularly in bringing the work of the multi-stakeholder group into the national government or the regional government, as African declarations have been successful in doing. And then improving multilingualism, so it's not just people like me speaking English to you. So I'll stop there. Wally, would you like to give have you managed to transfer the slides? Oops. One second, please.
The session was about the national or regional internet governance forums, IGFs. Back there, with what organization or association I work out there in Afghanistan is called NITPA, the National IT Professional Association of Afghanistan. We wanted to do the same thing. We wanted to organize the IGFs out there. So it was a national IGF we wanted to organize, but before that, what we wanted to do was to organize first SIG in order to build the capacity, in order to make the public awareness, aware about what internet governance is and what all these things is. But before we do the school, what happened that another body already did the IGF. Though we talked with them, we thought we wanted to negotiate with them so that we could do that collaboratively. What we wanted to do, we asked them to do first AppSig, the SIG first, so that the 30 or 35 participants who are going to participate in SIG, they will be a good asset for the IGF, a national IGF in Afghanistan. So we were not able to do the IGF, but the IGF happened in Afghanistan, and that was AF IGF. But what we did was the first Afghanistan school on internet governance. The NITPA, National IT Professional Association of Afghanistan, which is a homegrown community that relies on volunteer collaboration of its members. That's also part of the ICANN at large structure. They organized the first AppSig in April 26, 27, 2017. NITPA have been involved in a lot of other IG-related issues that public awareness was one of our most important thing. What we did, we organized some events with the help of ICANN Middle East team, and of course we also created a hub of IGF in 2015. And with the help of EPNIC, we organized some tutorials, online tutorials and webinars as well. The capacity we have 13 dedicated members that have participated in ICANN or other national regional IGFs or national regional SIGs. They have participated. In the future plan, what we are going to do, we will be organizing the AFNOG in 2017 and the second School on Internet Governance 2018. And we also have a plan to do the youth IGF, but that's still in pending because we are working on that and we are planning to do it either in 2018 or we are trying to do it in either 2019, because for that we have to build the capacity first and make public aware about it. So the idea about AFSIG was first discussed during APR IGF 2016 when one of our board members went to participate in APR IGF when he talked about the APSIG chairman, and they wanted to do the first SIG in Afghanistan. So in order to initiate the SIG or do the first AFSIG in Afghanistan, what we did, we firstly took advantage of all other national or regional School of Internet Governance that was being held in other countries or in region. So what we did, we sent 3 participants to participate in India School on Internet Governance 2016. We had one participant in MIAC SIG in 2016, 4 participants in ICANN 57, 2 participants in EPNIC, and 5 participants were in PK SIG. There were some challenges during sending our members to participate in these School of Internet Governances, and those problems were the visa issue problems, because especially in MIAC SIG 2016, I lost the chance to participate to go to Beirut because Lebanon has no embassy out there in Afghanistan. So what we did, we talked with, though because we were very limited in financial support and we didn't have that much support from other organizations, and while our NITPA organization is very much, it's very poor, they do not have that much capacity according to financial. So what we did, we talked with the one university. We took the advantage of their venue. Plus, we also talked with some other company who was an ISP company and asked them if they can provide us internet and the remote softwares we asked them for from the EPTLD. The format was that we had 9 lectures, remote sessions. There were 5 remote sessions, and we had 2 panel discussions. We had 166 applicants, from where 38 participants were selected, and 11 of them were female participants. It was a 2 days long event, and this was the structure of the SIG was something like that. We had 5 remote participants who represented ICANN, EPNIC, APTLD, and someone was there from Digital Rights Foundation of Pakistan. We had speakers, on-site speakers, and we had a panel, 2 panel discussions on site. The challenges which we faced, as I have already said, that we had the financial problems, we had the less application, and this less application goes back to the public awareness, that because not a lot of people were aware of internet governance. We had lack of faculty. We reached a lot of international faculty and speakers to ask them come to Afghanistan, but most of things we heard from them was that their organization are not supporting their what we call supporting them to come to Afghanistan because it's not a safe place according to them. And Yes, there was unprofessional cameramen and everywhere was a camera, so people were not able to, concentrate fully. We had some technical problems. Things to be noted is that let the structure of the committee to be very flat. It's a teamwork, not only one person can do that. And in the future, what we are going to do in AFSIC 2018, we will be organized for 3 days instead of 2 days, and instead of 30 participants, we will be selecting 30 participants instead of 38, because what we are going to do, we are planning to accommodate at least 5 to 6 people from the provinces. And that's all from the AFSIC. If you have any question about that, please.
Thank you very much. So now you know how to do a SIG. And what about IGFs that you've participated in? Do you have any questions for me or Walid, or any comments about the schools and the IGFs that you've participated in, please?
Thank you. This is Nuria. Actually, the question just came to my mind. I had to ask it before this in previous session. Well, my question is that as Mr. Bahar previously said that before discussing the internet governance, there should be internet. And this is the question which many people ask us in AFSIC. For example, in Afghanistan and most of developing countries, there are very few areas in which people have access to internet, and in far provinces and outdoor cities, there are no access to internet. If ICANN and some other organization, they are responsible to contributing in policy makings to an extent, then is there any other organization who is responsible to provide access, internet access to all parts of the world, especially in developing countries?
Providing infrastructure is not, well, there's no single organization. I think you'll find that people are building them all over the world. It tends to be these days by the private sector with support from donors and so on. But mobile networks are being built by companies that provide them. I don't know. You will see some development.
Well, there are many private companies, especially telecommunication companies in Afghanistan, who work in this area, and but still there is no organization who force people, who make policies that everyone should have access to internet, because it's an important issue. I think, I don't know.
I do know what you mean. I mean, we do hear a lot of talk in the United Nations about should the internet access to the internet as a right, and it's a legitimate discussion. It's become the thing that powers our economies and social lives and educations and so on. It's obviously something that powers development, but it's not for us to move our governments. I think what organizations like, well, the Internet Society certainly gets involved in trying to help with the further deployment of infrastructure. I don't think they do any groundbreaking sort of initial rollout of infrastructure, but they advise and help with certain types of expansion of access, but it's mainly organizations like the UNDP that are providing access, if anybody is. What ICANN can do, and the regional internet registries, is to try and ensure that when people need these critical internet resources that we develop policy for and help people use, then there's some readiness there to be able to use them. So in the case of many countries, it might be that we have appropriate standards for internationalized domain names, so that people can read the content and access email and access websites in their own languages. And a lot of that work is done, but it's not finished. So it's trying to make sure that should access be available, and in many cases it's a matter way beyond ICANN's remit, that when access is there, you have the ability to use what we are able to provide.
My question is about what is the requirement or the procedure to host or organize a local or national SIG or IGF?
For the Internet Governance School, nothing. As far as I'm aware, you just get organized. And that would be to talk to someone like Walid and Fahd and learn what was done and how to contact faculty, etc., etc. On the Internet Governance forums at the regional, national level, there are certain criteria you have to meet. There's it must be multi-stakeholder, there must be, you can't block any particular group. There's actually a frequently asked questions and a guide, quite comprehensive guide to creating your own regional and national IGF. But it's basically, the basic requirements are to follow the general guidelines of being multi-stakeholder in the way that you organize, to not exclude whoever that category may be, and that's about it. I think you also should show a certain degree of competency, however you do that. They don't want people, you have to be able to do it, and to show a legitimacy of the organizations behind it, I think. But you can find some very comprehensive guidelines and printed documents about, or PDF documents online about how to do that. We can probably share those.
Before you, can I add a question to him? If we plan to do a local IGF, should we apply to general IGF?
Yes, you apply to the Internet Governance Forum Secretariat. So I can't remember their website, but if you search for IGF Secretariat, then that website appears. And the links are from one of the main pull-down menus. It's one of the easier things to find on that website. Not everything is easy on that website, but this is. And the guides are comprehensive, as I said. They're not hard to find and not hard to follow. I think they're in multiple languages, but I wouldn't like to guess on which. But there's not just English.
Okay, I have a question, and I know something. Well, you were on the slide that there are no Arab IGF, national IGF that happened before. Correct me if I was wrong. I know why is that. Another thing, is there any application of the recommendation that's taking place in national IGFs that actually happened in real life, or just?
Are there any Arab region IGFs? Yes, there are. I mean, I just, yeah. And there has been an Arab region IGF, and that's being revamped as we speak, I think. So they're hoping for something next year. But yes, there are Arab region ones. Why I wouldn't have listed it is probably that they didn't pick it. I was thinking more of the issues as opposed to listing up the IGFs themselves. I was trying to look for some commonality of issues that are being discussed in different countries or different regions. Sorry, the second one. Right, so what has come out of these things? I think specifically it's hard to pin down. What you're certainly seeing is a number of a strengthening of a multi-stakeholder local community. That has happened in a lot of different regions. So you have a national network of stakeholders who meet on issues beyond just the annual IGF sort of thing. Seen that in Kenya, Uganda. I'm trying to remember ones that I've been involved with. Kenya, Uganda, a lesser degree in Rwanda. So the same people who are involved in the IGF organizing are also getting involved in a continuous process of providing comment into internet and ICT related policy in their national level. So that's a benefit. You bring like-minded people from different stakeholders together. I can't think of any specific recommendation that has gone on to influence A or B. Certainly there have been some in terms of comments on OTT, on social media type services, over the top services that have been influential in sort of like the telecommunications regulation. But how influential, I don't follow closely enough. And I mentioned that the declaration from the an African IGF about a general statement, Declaration of Rights and Principles, has been promoted quite widely and referenced in African Union Commission documents and processes. So that's kind of when you get into the policy making process, to actually see a concrete outcome is quite hard. But if you see your document being referenced in a different fora as an input document or a document that's being considered, then that's a sort of win in the policy world that we live in. It's not as sort of cut and dried as sometimes you'd want it to be. Finding countries to host is difficult for the global IGF too. The reason that it's in Geneva this year is because there is a fallback within the United Nations system that if there's a mandated conference like IGF that then doesn't find a host, Geneva will pick up the hosting duties. And it seems that for 2017, no country volunteered for the global IGF. Partly due to money, I'm sure, but it's the timing of it and the commitment of staff and so on and so forth. And the same thing would apply to national and regional IGFs. It comes down to whether the local organisers have the persuasive power to get somebody to host. It doesn't have to be a government hosting. It can be a group of stakeholders who find a university or find a space. Think about what you need. You need money, and I can come to that in a moment. But to think of actually somebody who will volunteer to host, that's really about the volunteers themselves, the individuals and the networks that they have. Sometimes they come through, sometimes they don't. But that's just one of those things. You have to fight and use your networks to find somebody who will be kind enough, like here, to host us. In terms of money, funds are always extremely difficult for these things. There is a support organisation run at the global level as part of the global IGF. I can't remember what it's called, but again, it's something that's quite it's quite prominent on the Internet Governance Forum website, and it might be the Internet Governance, is it the Forum Association or Internet Support Association? And Marcus Kummer, who was the founding sort of executive director of the IGF, is also running that now. So there are funds available, but that wouldn't cover the whole cost. You'd have to go out and find your own money, and that's like fundraising for any event. It's sort of good luck and use your networks and all the rest of it, but not easy.
Is it possible to have for any country to be a part of a national IGF and obviously at the regional level, or is it compulsory to be IGF to be on a regional level? IGF, Internet Governance Forums, both at national and regional levels. There is possibility to run national and regional ones.
I'm not sure of the criteria, but I think if you want to run I'll use Japan because I used to live there. If I wanted to run the Japan IGF, I should be a Japanese organisation and a Japanese organising committee. I think that they would take others to be involved, national, international organisations, or an ICANN or an ISOC could then support the Japan IGF, but the organising committee would be expected to be local. But I don't remember what the criteria are within or if it's mentioned within the guidelines that come from the IGF itself. I'd imagine that it requires local presence.
So the concept of SIG, School of Internet Governance, is more towards awareness, and Internet Governance Forums are actually towards discussion and policy side. This is what I understood.
Yes, the SIGs, the schools, are really about education, and it's I think like we are here this week, the idea is that you're coming to discuss. It's not just meant to be lectures. Hopefully we'll have dialogues between ourselves, and that's the point of the schools. So it's an educational opportunity, education from people presenting, but also from other participants. And then the IGFs are a dialogue. with a set agenda, a meeting agenda as a conference, but also trying with the purpose of, again, stimulating dialogue, which is the basic sort of underlying principle of the IGFs generally, that it's a forum for dialogue, not just presentation after presentation, speech after speech, panel after panel.
Muhammad Yusuf from Sudan. I would like to add to the Arab countries that have IGF. Sudan also has an IGF that was created like 1 year and a half ago. And I believe we're here to share experience. So my question is for Walid. Did you focus on your internet governance? Did you focus on the local internet governance, the local IGF, or did you focus on the global ones? And how did you make balance between the local and global? Did you have like instructors, local instructors, or did you bring someone from outside your country? So if you shed the light on the content of the school itself and the courses, and that would be useful for a lot of us, I think. Thank you.
So, as I said, Afghanistan did its first IGF, and it was in 2017. Unfortunately, I was not part of it. The other association did that. But what we were planning to do, we wanted to do first SIG, to make public aware about the school of about internet governance, so that after that we would go to the internet governance forum and let everyone come in and talk about what problems we have in Afghanistan, how can we solve that. So as I said, we already did first IGF, and the second one is going to be happen, I think, after 2 years or the next year. I don't know exactly about it because I was not part of the IGF in Afghanistan.
I think on that there's a group called, sorry, just quickly on that, there's a group called AllSig, which is All Schools and Internet Governance, that's forming, and one of the goals they have is to share different presentations, curricula, how to sort of organize. You can see how different schools have been organized and the types of issues that they've discussed, and that may help you if you want to develop a school of your own, to actually look at the presentation materials, to look at what the agenda was like. Is that, you know, does that fit the local situation or not? Because a lot of these issues are common. We're talking about common issues, whether it's in North America or you know, or Asia. So that will be helpful, but it's only forming at the moment. But it's a group called AllSig, and I think Fahd can probably share that because he's a member of it.
My question is, from your perspective, what hold back the IGF to become a decision-making event, and not just a high-level dialogue?
Sorry, what prevented it, or what should it be?
What should it be? What hold back the IGF to become a decision-making event instead of just a high-level dialogue?
I think the original idea was that the World Summit is, of course, a decision-making body. The whole purpose of it, of those 4 or 5 years, was to produce a document at the end that the member states agreed on. And so it was the purpose of the WSIS process, the summit process, is to produce that document. And it was realized that we needed something else, which was a place to actually have a better dialogue about that, that wasn't with the aim of arguing for individual text. You know, the process of WSIS was to argue about text. In the end, we were arguing about the placement of commas. And that was not where people felt the value was. The value would be talking to each other about our issues, trying to find common understanding, or just understanding our disagreements. Where the IGF is having problems is finding the balance between how do you produce something without some stakeholders feeling the need to negotiate text. You know, if it's in the name of a government, they get very concerned about a comma, because it's representing the people of that country. You know, that's what they're doing. So that's trying to give an extreme example. I'm not trying to blame you. It's for everybody that we don't want to go to Geneva in December and spend 4 days thinking about an argument of text. We want to go there to have a dialogue, but there's a dilemma there. At the same time, there's a recognition that we need some kind of output and some kind of way of making recommendations and some kind of way of delivering what was discussed in those 4 days. Where do you take the value and how do you share it? And I think the IGF has not yet found the way to do that. So that's the dilemma, if that sort of answers your question.
Can I ask a question? As far as I know, it should not be connected to any holder because of the multi-stakeholder structure. And should we construct an independent organization to organize a local one?
Independent organization in the sense of not being the government, or the idea would be that the organizing group would be multi-stakeholder, but the lead, if you want, because most things have some kind of lead, could be, I think. I don't think there's any prohibition on it being any stakeholder, but the committee should be equally weighted in the sense that, you know, there should be a representation of civil society, technical community, private sector and government, and if relevant, intergovernmental organizations. So I think the answer is you're okay having a government as the lead, but the committee itself and the organizing committee must be multi-stakeholder. You would need to organize the national and regional IGF. You do need to be a multi-state. You have to show that the organization of it is a multi-stakeholder activity. Yeah.
In schools of internet governance, people generally talk more in an educational way, but in every nation they present that issues from their own country perspective. That's fine, but in IGFs, when people discuss many challenges and IG-related issues, as it differs from country to country, from nation to nation, and when they discuss any challenges or problem or an issue, and they find a solution for that issue, how that solution can be changed to a policy? Should it be confirmed by international IGF, or they can issue those policies by themselves and implement it? How is the process? I mean, you got me?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's really by the national process itself that it's you can't really take something from here to the global IGF and hope that it will come back down to here again. It's really what you can organize at the national level, and that seems to be where people are being effective, is that if it will change on different countries and different locations, but if you can organize a representative multi-stakeholder group that has a recommendation, then you have to hope that the government or the regulatory authority will listen. But I can't say that they will, but you know, we have to hope that that would be the process. So if you show a strong and well thought out set of recommendations from a national multi-stakeholder group, then one would hope that the government would listen. But governments are governments, so because otherwise you won't have it.
Make an announcement. Some of you has left his or her luggage in the airport. Yos, Juni,